Right, so Parshas Vayeitzei, and a really important idea that I think is very important to discuss is really the motivators for why we do the things we do. So we find, basically these are ideas that we find in the Torah, two basic motivators that really motivate us to do the different things that we do. One of them is our intellect. We have our intellect that is a primary motivator in life. It's certainly a big reason why we do different things to do. We make a calculation, decide this is the right thing to do. And then we have our emotions. Our emotions are also big motivators in deciding and determining what to do. So we have our intellect and our emotion. And those are two things, and sometimes they work together, they work in tandem. And often they actually contradict each other, right? You shouldn't do something, but it feels like the right thing to do. It feels good to do it, right? You shouldn't have that last piece of cake, right? But it feels good to eat that last piece of cake. So that's when the feeling, the emotion there contradicts the intellect, and they're giving you, contradictory messages. And there it's the challenge on the person to decide, what is the right thing to do. So it's an interesting passage in the Talmud, and it says, Sadikim libam bershusam. And I'm going to try to get the right wording here. I'm going to just quickly look here. Tzadikim libam bershusam and rishaim bershus libam. And what that means is, we'll translate that. What that means is that by righteous people, their heart is in their control. Libam bershusam, their heart is in their control, in their domain. They own their heart. And heart generally refers to the emotion, right? We know that intellect, the place of intellect is in the brain, right? Even the way we speak, right? Our brain thinks and our heart feels. Well, in the Torah, it's like that as well. The heart is the home of the emotion. Okay, so it says that righteous people, their hearts are in their domain, are in their control. They have control over their emotions. While wicked people, it says their heart, they are in the control, in the domain of their hearts. In other words, our heart tells them to go, and they go. Tells them to do, and they do. They have no control over the emotion. This does not mean, by the way, that righteous people don't have emotion. What it simply means is that who runs the show? Who's in control? Emotion is certainly a very important faculty in a human being. To make something human means you add emotion to it, regardless. The question is, do you have control? Do you make who's the you? Does the intellect make the decisions, or does the emotion make the decisions? So I'm going to read something very interesting. If you look in the Torah and in the Tanakh in general, there's a bunch of sources where we find a different expression about someone speaking in his heart. Okay, so like the Torah obviously knows not only what a person says out loud, but the Torah also knows what a person is thinking. But the expression of the Torah is he speaks in his heart. That means he's speaking, he's kind of talking to himself internally. This is what he's thinking. Now, the expression is as follows. By some people, it says, Vayomer bilibo. And by some, it says, Vayomer el libo. Sometimes it says he speaks in his heart. And sometimes the expression is he speaks to his heart. Okay, so let me give you some examples. We have Esav. This should have been in last week's parsha. Vayomer Esav bilibo. Esav speaks in his heart. This was after Yaakov got the blessings from his father. Esav spoke in his heart that soon, my father's going to die, and I'm going to go ahead and kill Yaakov. So he speaks in his heart. Yeravam, another wicked person, Bilibo in his heart. Amar Naval Bilibo, another verse in Mishlei, the scoffer speaks in his heart. So there's this expression speaking in his heart, and all of them are by when you're talking about a wicked person. One point in case is Haman, when Mordechai. When the king asks Haman, what would you do what do you think should be done for the person that the king likes, right? Vayomer Haman Belibo, Haman speaks in his heart, who would the king want more than me? So again, Haman, Esav, Yeravam, all these different wicked people throughout history, they all were speaking in their heart. Now, when you look at the righteous people, I'll try to get some examples. The expression there is Vayomer El Libo. So first of all, you have Eliezer. Eliezer, when he talks about, again, a previous parsha, when he's talking about Rivka coming out, he was praying, right, to Hashem. He was speaking in his heart. And the expression there is Terem Achal Ledaber El Libi. As soon as I finished my prayer in my heart, Rivka came out. Rivka Yosef El Libi. He spoke to his heart. And also Chana, when she prayed, Chana Medaberetz Al Liba. Chana's prayer was on her heart. Vayomer David El Libo. Great people, the expression is they speak to their hearts, not in their hearts. And it's to express this concept, when you speak to your heart, you're basically giving the direction. The direction is not coming from the heart. The direction is coming from the intellect, from the moach, from the brain, from the intellect. That's what's calling the shots. The emotion is next, because you do speak to the heart. The heart has to be part of the human process to make it human, right? The emotion has to be there as well, but who's calling the shots? It's the intellect by righteous people, by wicked people. It seems that what's calling the shots is the emotion first. The intellect, it may or may not show up. Typically, the intellect is there to simply, qualify what the emotion already is feeling, and that's usually how it's done. If you need to make a defense for why I'm doing a certain thing, I have to come up with 101 reasons why it's okay. Why am I eating that last piece of cake? There's a good reason for it, and then you use your intellect to help justify the emotion. Really, the decision was carried out by the emotion, not by the intellect. And this is a very, very important concept. Just to kind of give us a little bit of I think it was the Maharal who gives this idea. I don't remember exactly, but he says if you look at the faculties of man, so then there's the intellect, there's the emotion, then there's the action, and the action is caused by the blood, right, of the body, the blood and flesh of the body. So there's three parts of the body that, so to speak, represent these three areas. The moach is the intellect of the brain, the lave, the heart, is the emotion, and then finally the kaved is the liver, where the blood is, and that's basically the human actions. So if you look at the three letters, the first three words, the first letter of each word is mem, lamed, chaf, is the word melech. And melech means he is a king over his domain. He is in control. His intellect decides, then his heart kicks in, his emotion, and finally the actions finish off whatever action that he decided based on his intellect that started there. That means you're in control of your situation. So one thing we find, very interesting, this idea that intellect is so important. It's not enough just to simply go with the road or go with the feelings of whatever they may be. When we look at the three avos, the three forefathers, we find that they all had a certain characteristic, if you will, right? Let's look at their characteristics and then look at how they were challenged. It was always completely not in consonance of their natural characteristics. Let me give you an example. Avram, the man of chesed, the man of kindness. This clearly, he was a natural. If you want to say what was a natural leaning, it was to do kindness, to be a kind person, to help people. This is what he wanted to do. This is what he dedicated his life to doing. If you look at the 10 tests that he had, none of them were, let's see how kind you can be. It was always, in fact, they were the opposite. He had to go do something, in fact, that was very not kind. That seemed, in fact, sometimes even outright brutal. That was the challenge, to go against his natural characteristic, where he can go ahead and use his intellect to hone in on his natural urges, natural desire. Okay, let's give you an example. The first one, Lech lecha me'aretzecha, leave your land and go to a foreign land. Sounds simple enough. What the Torah doesn't speak about explicitly, Rashi does talk about it, is that his father was in Haran. He had an aging father, and he left him. And basically, in those days, leaving means leaving, right? His father, Terach, ended up dying alone in Haran. Avram left him. And in fact, Avram was at one point even troubled by this. Like, I'm going to leave an old father. Like, he was a caring, giving individual. You don't just leave an old father to die. What kind of, there's a certain amount of the opposite of kindness that he was tested with. And it goes on. And he was tested with, going down to Mitzrayim and dealing with a Paro, who was the opposite of kindness, right? His sorrow was taken captive. Again, people who were looking for their self-interest. He had to deal with people who were selfish while he was such a selfless person. He had to go out and deal with these people, deal with Avimelech. Of course, the Akedah, the extreme example, and the example upon example, deal with Ephron, who was a conniving person who wanted to, who was after Avram's money. All these people he had to deal with were completely the opposite of what Avram was. And that's because Avram had to hone in on that natural tendency to be a giver. It's not enough to be a giver. You have to learn how to hone that in using your intellect. The intellect has to be the deciding factor here, not simply a person's natural tendencies. We find the same thing, simply interestingly, with Yitzchak. Yitzchak, again, we mentioned that he has a very different character trait than Avram. He wasn't just a carbon copy. In fact, he was very different. He was a person of discipline. And we find that Yitzchak's primary mitzvah, if you will, that he connected to was avoda. Avoda means service. It can mean service in terms of prayer. We know that he sat in prayer. The other thing that service can mean, service in the temple, based on Mikdash service. This was his thing. He had discipline and service. Those were his things. What happens? What was his life about? His life was, first of all, he had an Esav as a child. Esav, of course, is the opposite of any discipline, of any, simple discipline. Do what you're supposed to do. Esav simply didn't have that. Number one. And when Esav gets married, he marries these two women. One was called Basmas and one was called Yehudis. Okay, and they were fake names. They weren't their real names. Yehudis sounds like a Jewess, someone who actually, they said that Yehudis, interesting, before Yehuda was born, the concept Yehudis meant someone who denounced idol worship. So you had this Yehudis and this Basmas, who came from the word besamim, incense, that her actions were sweet like incense, but in reality, they were both intense idol worshippers. And the Medrash tells us, and it's an interesting Medrash, it says that due to the intense amount of idol worship that they did, Yitzchak, the father-in-law, got blinded from the smoke of their idol worship. Now you can understand that literally. That literally they were doing all this idol worship, and Yitzchak got blinded from the smoke. I would ask if that was the case, and how come no one else got blinded? I would think it's something else. It's something deeper. And it was that Yitzchak was struggling with this. He was challenged by this. He was a man of service of God. He was a man of avoda, and he has these two daughter-in-laws who are the opposite. They're idol worshippers to a huge extent, and he was challenged by it. He was struggled with this. He was blinded by it. He couldn't come to terms perhaps with it. That was the blinding, of Yitzchak. Something he became blind. Maybe he was physically blind, but this was something different, something deeper. So you see, once again, Yitzchak is challenged with something that's completely, opposite his nature. And of course, Yaakov, we mentioned, last week we spoke about Yaakov, the Ish Emes, the man of truth. And, he was a man. What does truth mean, by the way? Truth means tochel kavaro, says Rashi, and the Talmud talks about it. Tochel kavaro means your insides and your outsides are the same. What you say is what you feel is what you say. You don't have these two duality of messages where you're saying one thing, but you're thinking another thing. Yaakov didn't have that. He said it as it was. If he felt it, he said it, and that's it. There was no, you knew when he said it, that's what he felt, that's what he really meant. There was no other opinion, deep down inside. And that's what Yaakov was about. And what Yaakov had to deal with throughout his life, first of all, dealing with an Esav. What was Esav? Esav was the opposite, right? We know Esav was the faker, right? It's funny, every year I used to teach second grade for 3 years. And every year when it came to around this parsha, and it was time we were learning about Esav, I'd have a great time drawing a picture of Esav on the board. I used to doodle as a kid, so I kept my doodling skills up. And I used to draw a picture, and my picture, I had a lot of fun with it. He had huge biceps, right? He's wearing a tank top, and he's very hairy, of course. He's a scary guy. He looks like somebody that would drive, a pickup truck. And he'd have a tattoo. I put, Dad and a heart, on the tattoo, because he was very good with kibbud av, with respecting his father. Anyways, he's holding a bow and arrow or a gun. He's an NRA member. He's a tough guy, right? That's who he is. He's a scary-looking, tough guy, half person, half beast, right? That's the kind of person we kind of picture Esav. But if that was the case, if that's really how Esav looked, then, obviously he wouldn't pull the wool over Yitzchak's eyes. Yitzchak wasn't, his father wasn't, a complete imbecile. How did he not see right through that? Look at it. He's one yeshiva student who's sitting and studying Torah, and one beast of a human being going out to the fields. So it must be that Esav too talked the talk and walked the walk and dressed the dress. He also looked like a yeshiva student. We like to picture Esav as this beast. That's probably not what it really was. He wore, the yeshiva garb, and he walked around talking Torah, right? He had this external talk of as if he was a real Torah scholar. But we know that deep down, he was not the same person that he spoke. He spoke one thing and he acted a completely different thing. He was complete duality. He was the opposite of Yaakov. In fact, the reason why probably Yitzchak, his father, was tricked by them was because Esav was such a good faker, and Yaakov was not a faker. Yaakov said it as it was. I'll give you an example. I don't know if this ever happened, but if Yaakov woke up late that day and didn't daven on time, or he missed Shema, he said it. He didn't hide it. This is who he is. He's not hiding anything. He wasn't perfect. I'm sure he made mistakes, and he didn't hide anything. He said what it was. He didn't fake. Esav was a complete fraud from beginning to end. They say Esav represents the chazir, the pig, right? Because the pig, we know there's two kosher symbols, two signs to be a kosher animal. One is they chew the cud. That's an internal symbol, internal sign. And one is the external sign if they have the split hoof. So the pig has the split hoof. He sticks out his hand and says, look, I got the split hoof. But deep down, we know that he's not chewing his cud. He's a faker, right? He's not a really kosher animal. That's what Esav was the faker. So Yaakov had to deal with an Esav. So he deals first with an Esav, who's the fraud. Then he deals with the Lavan, who was the greatest con artist in history. And not only that, he was being taken advantage of, and he had to, in the end, pull his own shtick, pull his own tricks to come out with anything, right? He pulled a trick in the end. He had to help with the malach. It wasn't his thing. He had to trick Esav to get the blessings. He had to do things that were completely opposite his nature throughout his life, right? Even when he comes back, he meets Esav again. He tells him, "Oh yeah, you go ahead to Seir. I'll come after you." And again, he's pulling the wool over Esav. He's going completely against his nature, and those were his challenges throughout his life, dealing with Shem, with Dinah, everything. He's constantly having to go against his nature. That's his challenge in life, going against your nature, not to go with your nature. And the idea, once again, is that he's supposed to not just say, "Oh, that's how I feel. I feel like a person wants to be honest. I'm going to be honest." That's not what God wants from us. He wants us to take that intellect to know this is what's right and go against what you feel. And your mind, your intellect needs to be leading the way, not just the feeling, not just the emotion. So, this is a powerful message, and there's one line. I'll finish with this. Is the Vilna Gaon in the beginning of oh boy, I forgot the name of the sefer. It's in my head. But anyway, the Vilna Gaon, he says a very powerful line. He says, a person was only created to fix his character traits. And if not for that, lama lo chaim. If he doesn't fix his character traits, then why is he alive? Why is he here at all? There's no other reason why we're in this world except for to fix our character traits. And fixing our character traits means it's not enough to simply have good character traits. Maybe we have certain positive characteristics that we were born with and that we have. That's not enough. Our job in this world is to hone in on them, to apply the intellect and to say, this is what Hashem wants from us, and to lead with our intellect. And that way, perfect our character traits. It's not enough that we're born with it. Okay. I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbos, and all the best.
Oh, thank you.